Hey there, horror lovers! Today, we bring you a real-life story that took place in Tecate, a city in Baja California, Mexico. It was located at the end of a dangerous road known as La Rumorosa, which means the murmuring. A married couple lived there at the end of 1910. That was a time of revolution, but the couple was kind and peaceful towards everyone. They had no kids, and thus their lives were pretty peaceful. He worked the land, while she was in charge of everything related to the house. They didn't have neighbors at the time, and few people ever passed by that place. However, one day, two men that had been walking for hours arrived there, who looked exhausted and dehydrated. They saw the husband working at a nearby farm, so they approached him and asked him for a bit of water. Unfortunately, the farmer had drunk all the water he had with him and apologized for not having any more. Because of that, the farmer invited them to his house so they could eat and drink whatever they wanted. The married couple had a wonderful well that allowed them to never go thirsty despite how arid the soil was. Once they arrived at the house, the wife welcomed them kindly. The outsiders greeted her by taking off their hats and showing their best face. They drank, ate, and talked with the couple for a long time. Time passed so fast that the walkers didn't show signs of wanting to depart, even though it was getting late. So, with the kindness that characterized them, the couple invited them to spend the night in their humble home. The couple went to sleep, happy for finally having visitors and having had a very nice conversation. However, everything changed in the middle of the night when a terrifying scream was heard in the surrounding area. Nobody knows exactly what happened. All that was found out is that the two walkers were actually a couple of bloodthirsty and heartless criminals. They robbed the man who opened the door of his home for them, and not satisfied with that, tortured him with no remorse. The farmer was killed with an extreme level of cruelty which had never been seen before around there. He was tied with chains, they ripped out his eyes, and then he was thrown to his own well to then cover him with stones. Those who saw the corpse could never forget such a sight. Nobody knew what happened to the wife, and the murderers were never found. However, the story doesn't end there, since the inhabitants of that area keep on passing down the story generation to generation. They say that at night, strange sounds come out of the well. Chains rattling, weeping, and even someone yelling for help. They say that the killed farmer still looks for his lost wife, and then in the mornings, people can clearly see the footprints of his chained feet around the house. Some people walking at night have even claimed that they've heard stones falling to the bottom of the well, or bubbles of a body being submerged.
Hello, horror lovers. We bet you want to hear new horror stories. And as you may know, there are hundreds of legends in Mexico, which take place in remote times, but still make us shudder. So today we'll talk about one of them. It happened near what we know today as La Laguna, or the Little Lake, in the middle of Mexico City. It was a dark but calm night when the priest Agustin Aparicio was heading to a meeting with some of his parishioners and friends. In the region, everyone knew him as the preacher of God's word, and when they bumped into him, they would kiss his hand and would promise to donate things for the poor. That's why he was taking longer than normal to arrive. The street was narrow and stone-paved, and there was no more light than the one provided by the moon's reflection. The priest was thinking about the upcoming reunion with his friends. He really wanted to unwind after a long day. They would normally play cards and even gamble, but would frequently get interrupted by the pleas of the neighbors. He kept walking and soon heard the steps of someone following him. He had already crossed the most crowded streets, so it was weird for someone to follow him so close and so hastily. He didn't look back in case it was a mugger who wanted to catch his attention. The priest kept walking firmly towards his destination. However, his doubts were soon resolved. The voice of a man said, "Excuse me, Father." The priest turned his head and saw two young men in distress. The priest asked them what was going on, and they told him that there was an agonizing woman near them who wanted to confess before passing away. He had never seen those young men, but the priest made no excuses. He decided to help them and asked them to please take him quickly to that woman. They helped the priest get on a cart that was waiting for them and told the driver to take them to the woman's house. They crossed many streets, and when they reached their destination, they helped the priest get down and then knocked on a door. A short and old woman, disheveled and with her face looking down, opened the door for them. She had a lit candle on one hand and was wearing very old clothes. A few seconds later, the priest detected a sickening stink coming out of that house, which was hardly bearable. However, he focused on doing his job, and the old woman took him to the room where the moribund lady was. Before going in, the old woman gave the candle to the priest and left him alone. Once in the room, the priest found a lady lying on a bed. She was wearing a luxurious velvety dress, as well as a diamond tiara on her head. Everything was filled with beautiful embroideries. However, what really stood out was the beauty of her face and the blonde hair which spread on her pillow. She was crying and asked the priest to please come closer. He did, and he slowly took out his rosary and a white handkerchief. He started the confession and felt true pity for this agonizing female. She was suffering very much as she shared her sins with him, and he could barely understand her because she wouldn't stop weeping. Even a few tears escaped the priest's eyes. However, as time passed, the woman gradually got more calm and resigned. The father freed her from all her sins by giving her absolution and told her goodbye by giving her a kiss. However, when he did, he realized something terrible. The woman was already dead. He called the old woman who opened the door for him to give her the terrible news. But nobody responded. He went to the house's living room and searched the rest of the rooms. He didn't see anyone, and so he decided to go out to the street to look for the young men who took him there. However, they weren't anywhere to be found either. He thought about going back into the house, but when he reached the door, it started to creak, as well as closing on its own. He tried to keep it open but couldn't. That force wasn't normal. He had never seen anything like that before. And then after the door closed completely, he heard a horrible scream coming from the inside. He was shaken and perplexed and couldn't understand what was going on. Scared, he quickly went away to meet with his friends, who would likely be worried about him by now. He accelerated his pace as much as he could, while the streets remained dark and solitary. He entered the house where he would meet with his friends, looking pale and with a terrified expression. Some of the people present started to ask him what was going on, while others just joked about how he arrived late because he was afraid of losing his bets. He remained silent for a while, trying to recover, under the fixated gaze of his friends. Sweat fell through his forehead. He walked so fast to the house he was almost running. So, he looked in his pocket to grab something to wipe off the sweat. And there he realized that the white handkerchief and the rosary he used in that house had disappeared. That's when he told his friends what happened. They were all very fond of the priest, and so they told him not to worry, that they would send a couple of guys to recover the objects that he forgot. He accepted, although he kept thinking about what happened, because he was sure that he had put them in his pocket. When the guys reached the place, they knocked on the door, but nobody responded, and the house seemed to be abandoned. They asked the neighbors about it, but all of them said that they didn't know anything. And thus the guys came back. When they got back to the meeting, they wanted to verify the address of the place in case they got it wrong. However, the priest insisted that it was the right address, and they saw him so afflicted that he decided to go back to the place altogether the next day. As soon as sunrise came, they went back to the place indicated by the priest. But even after knocking many more times, nobody opened the door. The priest was completely perplexed, since he was sure that was the house he had visited, although it now looked different. While they were at the entrance, a neighbor appeared, a senior. He warned them that nobody would open, since nobody had been living there for years now. The senior also told them that years before, they heard noises coming from that house. His wife went to the window to see what was going on, and terrified, she saw the house was in flames, and how a lady wearing a velvety vest was stuck inside. She seemed to be running from one side to the other, screaming in pain, as the flames engulfed her from feet to chest. Due to the shock of that scene, the wife was never the same. She fell ill and eventually died. Despite hearing this sad story, the father kept insisting on getting into the house, so they called a locksmith to open the door. and effectively there was nobody inside, and the house was practically in ruins. But even then they confirmed the priest's version of the events, when in one of the rooms they found his rosary and his handkerchief thrown on the floor. However, that's not the only thing they found. They also found the disturbing and putrid corpse of a woman, with several parts of her body completely burnt. And just like the priest had described, she was wearing a velvety dress and a diamond tiara. Shivers ran down the spines of everyone present. At the same time, they started to hear murmurs. It was Augustine the priest, who wouldn't stop praying. They observed him attentively and noticed that his eyes now had a weird color and that a strange foam was coming out of his mouth. And suddenly the priest collapsed, falling to the ground. He was dead.
Hey there, horror lovers. Have you ever suffered from sleep paralysis? Today, we'll share with you the story of Lucas, a 22-year-old man who was terribly traumatized due to this disorder. It was a Tuesday, and he woke up at 3 in the morning, feeling very weird. He quickly opened his eyes as if something just jolted him awake. He was facing up, and despite trying to move his muscles, he couldn't. His gaze was fixated on the ceiling, and then he started to feel a lot of heat. His body was reacting to the fear. He tried to stay calm, but something didn't let him. A feeling that there was danger nearby. On more than one occasion, he read about sleep paralysis, but he had never experienced it before. Knowing what might be happening to him, he decided to focus on gradually moving some parts of his body. And after a lot of patience, he did it. His limbs started to wake up from their slumber, and he could finally lay on his side and breathe in relief. He felt calmer, but he still felt weird after having the feeling that someone was going to hurt him. That was really perplexing. He knew that on some occasions, people who suffer from sleep paralysis feel that someone is observing them, but he couldn't interpret where the fear was coming from. He kept on living his life as normal after that and would sometimes remember what happened, wishing for it to never happen again. However, it did happen once more. A few days later, he experienced exactly the same thing, with his eyes wide open and his body completely rigid. And now he was able to identify his fear. He had the feeling that someone was observing him from the left side of the room. However, from his completely defenseless position, he could only see the ceiling. It was like letting yourself get killed. He knew he was in danger, but his body did nothing. Sweat started to run through his forehead while he tried unsuccessfully to move to the left. And after a few endless minutes of experiencing true panic, he tried to turn to the other side. That time, his body actually responded and he clumsily turned to the right. Oh no, it can't be, he thought. That wasn't the correct side. He wanted to turn to the other side to see who was stalking him. But now he was in a worse position, turning his back on the danger. Not seeing anything increased his hearing capacity. And soon enough, he started to hear someone else's breathing in the room. Moreover, he also felt a strong and putrid stink that invaded the entire room. At that moment, Lucas was so scared that he was about to lose consciousness. He even thought that it would be better if he was killed as soon as possible. When you have sleep paralysis, you don't notice different smells and you don't hear other people breathing, he thought. Someone was actually going to attack him. He didn't know what was happening to him, but it was horrible. And whoever was there, it was getting closer and closer to him. And then Lucas could feel the breathing right on the back of his neck. That was the end, he thought. On the wall, Lucas did notice a shadow, but couldn't tell what it was. One more time, he tried to move his body to defend himself, but it was useless. He also struggled to scream, but all that came out was a weak whimper. His eyes and throat were aching since he was forcing them too much. But in that moment, pain was the least important thing. All he wanted was for that nightmare to end once and for all. However, even though Lucas had practically given up, he made a last-ditch effort to move. And to his surprise, he did it. He had no idea what kind of creature he would face, but the truth is that there was nothing there. The room was completely empty. He was able to sit down and try to recover his breath and his composure. He decided that it would be better to go to the kitchen and make some lime blossom tea, convinced that everything he just experienced had been a livid nightmare. He felt better and went back to bed. However, when he was about to fall asleep again, a voice startled him. He noticed once again breathing on the back of his neck and then heard the voice say, "I'll see you again at 3 every single night." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode.